Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me where you are watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. I still remember the way the afternoon light fell through my living room window the day everything quietly shifted inside me. It wasn't a dramatic moment, not the kind of thing people imagine when they think of life-changing conversations. It was just a slow Sunday, the kind where the house feels too quiet and the kettle seems louder than usual. I had invited my cousin's son, Daniel, to stop by because he was in town for a short visit, and I hadn't seen him in years. He used to be that shy boy who hid behind his mother's coat at family gatherings, and somehow he grew into a young man who carried himself with a calmness I never quite managed to learn. When he walked into my home, he looked around with this gentle smile that made me feel as if he already knew what to say before even sitting down. We made tea, though he barely touched his cup. He seemed distracted, like someone who rehearsed a speech but wasn't sure when or how to start it. I didn't pressure him. I never do that with people, especially not with him. Something about Daniel always made me more patient than I usually am. We talked about simple things at first: his job, his travels, his plans. Yet, even while he spoke, I could tell his mind was somewhere else, circling something heavier. I felt it in the pauses between his sentences. I felt it in the way he kept glancing at me, then looking away, trying to gather his courage. A part of me wanted to ask him directly what was wrong, but another part of me knew the moment would reveal itself when it was ready. I didn't expect that moment to arrive when it did. I was wiping crumbs off the table after we shared a small plate of pastries. That's when Daniel finally said my name in a tone I hadn't heard from him before, soft, steady, and painfully sincere. When I looked up, I saw something in his eyes I wasn't prepared for. Not fear, not confusion. Something closer to honesty pressing against the edge of a secret. He told me he remembered something from years ago, something I thought no one in our family ever noticed. It wasn't a scandal or anything inappropriate, just a part of my life I had tucked away because it was easier not to think about it. It was the truth about why I distanced myself from the family for a long time, a truth I thought I had successfully hidden behind business and polite excuses. He said he always wondered why I disappeared from gatherings, why I stopped joining trips, why I changed overnight from the aunt who planned everything to the aunt who kept her phone on silent during holidays. I felt my breath catch when he confessed that he saw me crying once at his mother's house, years ago, when I had slipped into the guest room to gather myself. I didn't know anyone had seen. I didn't know a child could remember that so clearly. Hearing him say it brought back emotions I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. The only sound was the weak hum of the refrigerator, and somehow even that felt like it softened so we could sit in the truth together. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. My mind drifted back to that time when everything in my life felt heavy, when responsibilities piled on top of each other, when I felt unappreciated and overwhelmed, when the people I relied on were too busy to notice I needed help. I swallowed hard, realizing how much of that I had buried. Daniel didn't push me. He just sat there, waiting, giving me space in a way that was surprisingly mature for someone his age. It felt odd, sitting across from him and feeling seen, not as the strong woman everyone assumed I was, but as the human being underneath. The sunlight shifted again, falling across his face, revealing an expression filled with sincerity. For the first time in a very long time, I felt safe enough to breathe out the truth I had avoided for years. And that moment, quiet, unexpected, and deeply human, was what began everything that followed. When I finally gathered enough air in my lungs to speak, I didn't know where to start. It had been so long since I allowed myself to talk about that difficult time, and even longer since anyone had asked me about it without turning it into gossip or judgment. Daniel simply watched me with that calm, patient expression, as if he had all the time in the world to hear whatever I needed to say. Something about that made it easier, not easy, but easier, to let the words come out. I told him I had gone through a period in my life when everything felt heavier than it should have. I didn't use dramatic language. I didn't make it sound bigger than it was. But I told him enough for him to understand. I explained how I felt out of place in my own life, how expectations from family and work piled up until I felt like I was disappearing beneath them, how I didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like I was failing someone. I admitted that the day he saw me crying was the day I reached a breaking point, and I confessed that, out of embarrassment, I convinced myself that the family didn't need me around, so I stepped back. Daniel didn't interrupt once. He didn't look shocked or uncomfortable. Instead, he nodded slowly, absorbing every word. When I finished, he let out a quiet breath, the kind people release when they've been holding on to something for too long. I realized then that he wasn't only here to understand me. He had come with a truth of his own. He shifted slightly, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor of emotion beneath it when he told me how much he noticed back then, even though he was young. He said he remembered the way I used to bring warmth into family gatherings, how I always made sure everyone felt included. He remembered how his mother used to say I was the glue that held certain moments together. And then he admitted something I never imagined hearing from him. When I withdrew, he felt the change too. He told me that, as a boy, he used to think he had done something wrong. He thought maybe he said something that upset me or behaved in a way that made me avoid the family. He said he spent months wondering why I didn't come around as much, and no one ever gave him a clear answer. Hearing that felt like someone gently pressing their hand against a wound I'd forgotten was there. I felt my heart sink a little, not from guilt, but from the realization that my silence had echoes I never intended to create. I apologized softly, but Daniel quickly shook his head. He said he didn't come to blame me. He came because he finally understood. He told me he went through something similar in recent years, a phase where he felt invisible, overwhelmed, and unsure of who to turn to. That's when the memory of seeing me cry came back to him, and suddenly he understood how deeply a person can hide their pain. He said that moment from his childhood became a strange kind of reminder that even adults, especially adults, can be hurting quietly. And he wanted to tell me that he admired the strength it took for me to keep going, even if I didn't realize he had seen the cracks beneath the surface. I felt a warmth rise inside me, a gentle kind that didn't overwhelm but softened everything it touched. His honesty wasn't heavy. If anything, it lifted something off my shoulders. The house felt different too, less quiet, more alive, as if the truth we shared settled into the walls and made them feel safer. We moved to the couch after that, sitting where the late afternoon light painted long patterns across the rug. The air between us felt lighter. Daniel asked questions, but none that pushed too far. He wasn't trying to expose my past. He was trying to understand it. And as I answered, something unexpected started happening inside me. I felt myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. I told him things I didn't plan to say, the frustrations I carried, the loneliness I dismissed, the choices I made, and the ones I wished I hadn't. He listened with an attentiveness that made me feel, for the first time in a long time, truly heard. Not judged, not analyzed, just heard. The sun dipped lower, turning the room a soft amber. Daniel's expression softened even more, and he said something that stayed with me long after that day ended, something that marked the turning point of our conversation. He said, "I came today because you were the first adult who ever made me feel understood, and I wanted you to know you deserve that same understanding too." For a moment, I didn't know what to do with that truth. It felt like a gift I hadn't asked for but deeply needed, and as the golden light shifted and the evening crept in, I realized this conversation was becoming something much more meaningful than either of us expected. It was no longer just a visit. It was a connection, quiet, honest, healing, growing in a place neither of us knew had been waiting. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me where you are watching from. I always enjoy seeing the places these stories travel to. As the evening deepened, something subtle but unmistakable shifted between us. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was more like a quiet settling of truth, the kind that makes a room feel warmer, even if the temperature hasn't changed. Daniel sat across from me, the fading light catching the thoughtful look on his face, and I found myself studying him the same way I might study a memory that suddenly became clearer with time. We had talked for hours without noticing. The tea had gone cold, the pastries untouched since earlier, and yet neither of us seemed eager to move or interrupt whatever was unfolding. I realized how rare it was to share space with someone who wasn't trying to fix me or judge me, someone who simply wanted to understand. It made me feel lighter, but also strangely exposed in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, just honest. Daniel glanced around my living room, his eyes lingering on the framed photographs lining the shelves. Pictures of family gatherings, celebrations, old trips, and quiet moments. He pointed to one photo of a much younger me, standing beside my cousin during a summer barbecue. I remember that day clearly, the laughter, the sun, the way everything felt simpler. Daniel asked if I missed those times, and the question settled into me with surprising weight. I told him I missed the version of myself who believed she belonged, and I admitted that over the years, I slowly convinced myself that stepping back was easier than trying to explain why I felt so exhausted. He nodded, not pitying me, but understanding in a way that made my chest tighten slightly. Then he admitted something about himself too. He had spent years pretending he was fine, carrying pressure he didn't know how to express because he didn't want to be a burden. For a moment, we just sat there, two people from different stages of life recognizing the same quiet struggle in each other. He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said softly, "it's strange how we both tried to protect everyone around us by hiding what we felt. Maybe if we had talked back then, things would have been different." His words weren't heavy. They were gentle, almost reflective. I felt something settle inside me again, a kind of clarity I hadn't expected. I asked him what made him decide to come now, after all these years. The corner of his mouth curved into a faint, warm smile. He told me he had reached a point in his own life where staying silent felt heavier than the truth itself. He said he'd been carrying that memory of me, the one from the guest room, the one he never spoke of, like a reminder that people can look strong while quietly falling apart. He said he didn't want either of us to live like that anymore. Hearing that made my throat tighten, not because of sadness, but because of how genuine it felt. I hadn't expected him to think of me in that way, as someone who made an impression on him during his childhood. It humbled me in a way I couldn't explain. When I finally looked up, he was watching me with the most sincere expression, as if making sure his words didn't overwhelm me. I told him the truth, that no one had ever acknowledged that part of my past before, and that his words meant more than he realized. He nodded again, and in that quiet moment, I felt something indescribable. An emotional closeness, nothing inappropriate, just an unexpected sense of connection rooted in shared vulnerability. The room dimmed as the last of the daylight slipped away. I reached over to switch on the lamp beside us, its warm glow filling the space with a comforting softness. Daniel looked around as if seeing the room for the first time, calm, lived in, and familiar. Then he said something that struck me deeply. "I didn't just come to tell you what I remembered. I came because I wanted to give you back the truth you gave me when I was little." I didn't understand at first, but then he explained. He said that when he was younger, there was a moment when I spoke to him during a family picnic, just a small conversation, nothing I remembered, but he never forgot it. He said I told him that he didn't need to pretend to be brave all the time, that adults get afraid too, and that being honest with yourself is the first step to feeling free. I didn't even remember saying it, but he remembered every word. And then, with a calm certainty, he added, "Today, I wanted to give that same honesty back to you. You've carried too much alone." His voice wasn't emotional in a dramatic way. It was steady, warm, and deeply sincere. It was the kind of truth that settles into your bones and stays there. I felt something in me soften, something I hadn't allowed to soften in years. It was strange how a conversation, simple, quiet, human, could reach places I thought were long closed. But that evening wasn't done with its revelations. Before I could respond, Daniel gently asked a question that made me pause, a question that opened the door to a part of myself I had been avoiding even more than the past. And that question changed everything that followed. When Daniel asked his question, it felt like the entire room paused with me. The lamp hummed softly, the clock ticked in a steady rhythm, and yet everything inside me stilled as if waiting for my answer. He didn't ask anything dramatic or intrusive. It was a simple question, spoken with sincerity. Are you truly happy now, or are you just getting by? No one had asked me that in years. Not directly, not without expectation, not without judgment. People usually assume women my age have everything sorted out, or that we've grown used to whatever life handed us. But hearing it from someone who wasn't trying to push me or fix me, someone who genuinely wanted to understand, felt strangely intimate in a quiet, emotional way. I opened my mouth, closed it again, then finally admitted the truth I hadn't dared to say out loud. I told him that I had built a life that functioned, a life that looked stable on paper, but that somewhere along the way, I settled into routines that numbed the very parts of me I once loved. I told him I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't fully living either. I was moving through my days like someone checking boxes instead of someone choosing joy. Daniel didn't react with surprise. Instead, he listened with the same calm attentiveness that defined our entire evening. He leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees, and said something soft and steady. I felt the same way before I changed things. That's why I came today, because I wondered if maybe you deserved a moment of truth too. His words didn't come from pity. They came from recognition. And hearing that made something inside me loosen, like a knot slowly untying after years of being pulled tight. I told him I wished I had been brave enough earlier, both for myself and for the people who cared without saying it. He smiled gently and reminded me that it's never too late to reclaim the parts of yourself you thought were lost. For a moment we simply sat together, not speaking, just breathing in the same soft glow of the room. It felt comfortable, warm, familiar, the kind of silence that wraps around two people when there's no need to fill it with anything. The kind of silence that says, "I'm here, and you're not alone." Daniel began sharing pieces of his own journey, moments when he doubted himself, when he felt like he wasn't enough, when expectations weighed on him the same way they weighed on me. He described how he slowly learned to listen to his own voice instead of chasing approval. Hearing him talk about his struggles made me realize how often we assume the younger ones have it all figured out simply because they look confident. But confidence can be a mask just as easily as silence can be. I felt a deep appreciation growing for him, not just as my cousin's son, but as a thoughtful, grounded young man who understood the complexity of emotions people often dismiss. He wasn't lecturing me or offering easy solutions. He was sharing a perspective shaped by empathy, shaped by the quiet truths he carried through his own life. As the night deepened, the conversation softened into something even more personal. Not romantic, not inappropriate, just profoundly human. Daniel looked at me with a sincerity that felt almost healing and said, "You showed me compassion when I was young. Today, I wanted to return that kindness to you." That moment stirred something in me, a mix of gratitude, warmth, and a gentle ache for all the years I spent believing no one noticed my struggles. To realize he had carried that childhood memory all this time, and that it influenced him enough to seek me out now, felt like a gift I never expected. When he finally stood to leave, The house felt different, lighter, like a window had opened somewhere inside me. I walked him to the door, and as he stepped into the cool evening air, he paused and turned back with one last truth. "You deserve to feel seen," he said softly. "Don't hide from yourself anymore." Those words lingered long after he walked down the path and disappeared into the quiet of the night. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the emotions of the day settle into me, not as heaviness, but as a kind of awakening. For the first time in years, I felt something genuine, a spark of clarity, a sense of possibility, a reminder that emotional connection doesn't always come from where we expect, but it arrives exactly when we need it most. That evening taught me a truth I had avoided for too long. Sometimes the people who help us rediscover ourselves aren't the ones we seek out, but the ones who quietly choose to see us. And in that unexpected, honest moment with Daniel, I found a piece of myself I didn't realize had been missing all along.